All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to this webinar on advocating to your municipal council as part of TAL's continuing webinar series on advocacy topics. My name is Tim Janewski and I'm CEO of TAL. And I'm pleased to introduce your webinar presenter, Allison Stewart. Allison has worked in school and public libraries for over 16 years. She worked in an elementary school library for 2 years before jumping into the shark-infested waters of the local high school library. She ran that library for 7 years before moving to Stony Plain Public Library in September of 2010 as the assistant director, and she became director in 2013. Allison is passionate about libraries and believes information professionals will eventually rule the world because they know how to control the flow of information. And just a couple of housekeeping items before Allison starts. We will be monitoring the chat function, so please post any questions about connection issues that you might have, and our IT librarian Brian will respond to those. We ask that you save your questions until the end, unless Allison calls for them. Brian will read the questions to Allison at the end of the session, and we'll have at least 10 minutes of questions for Allison at 2:20 p.m. So please enjoy the webinar and welcome Allison.
I'm just sliding into place here. So thank you all very much for joining in. I know we're all probably a little bit stressed out right now these days about talking to our councils. I'm waiting for all the technical difficulties, and they seem to have started because I can't get my slides to move, Brian. There we go. Okay. So before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that in Alberta, except for those regions of unceded territory, we are all treaty people, sharing traditional gatherings, places of diverse Indigenous people who signed Treaty 6, 7, and 8. And as treaty people, we all have the obligation to take the time to understand what that means to be a treaty person and what our responsibilities are. And again, this is not my first presentation, but it is my first webinar, so I'm hoping that those of you out there will be patient in case we do have technology difficulties. The amazing Brian Lynn here is going to try and keep me on track, and so we don't go over time, so I can respect your time as well. And we'll keep in mind too that our Alberta library land is not a uniform, constant, consistent entity. Our various municipalities exist with an amazing range of population sizes, and the descriptions are also problematic because officially Stony Plain, which has 17,000 people and is just only 30 minutes from Edmonton, is considered a rural library, which if you're tuning in from a hamlet or a summer village is probably making you laugh really hard right now. But as we go through the webinar, I will try very hard to be aware of those differences. But that being said, the core principles of talking to your councils are the same regardless of how big or how isolated your library is. What's different is who's going to be doing the necessary work. If you are a smaller library, your board is going to have to pitch in and help out. It's not realistic to expect a library manager or administrator or whatever title you use for the person who's running the library to do all of the advocacy work because you only have a limited number of hours allotted to you to run the library. And with that in mind, I'll use the phrase your library a lot just to remind you that it's not just you that has to do the work. Since advocacy is work that has to be done constantly, it's not something that can be done off to the side of your desk. Now, of course, if you are a larger library, it's entirely possible you have a marketing or a communications department that is doing this work for you already. And in that case, in this webinar, I might provide a framework to think about the work that that department is doing and see if it can be tweaked a little. So with that understanding of who is going to be doing the doing, let's jump in and get started. So to begin with, what's the most important thing to remember about talking to your council is that your appearance in council chambers should not be an isolated annual event. That appearance is one part of ongoing advocacy that your library has been doing or should have been doing from one annual report to the next. If your library only crosses council's radar through the board minutes and a once-a-year presentation, they're not going to know the full value that your library brings to your community. And this makes it much easier to cut your funding because they don't know much about you, they don't care, they don't know you. So give you a few minutes to read the slide. and I'm really hoping that you're all singing me, 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 me in your heads right now. It is really important to overcome our Canadian modesty when it comes to our libraries. Don't be afraid to talk about your library. Every now and then when someone from the community asks how you're doing and you're not inside the library, say you're doing great because, and then insert awesome thing here that you're doing in your library or that just happened or is going to happen. Use some judgment here. You don't want to be doing this every time you talk to people because they might start avoiding you. If no one says hello to you anymore, that's your sign you've overdone it. But if you do this at least 3 times a month with a different person each time, you'd be amazed at the impact that has. Word of mouth is a powerful tool, especially in our smaller communities. And if a person using your library says something good about their experience, ask them if they mind if you quote them in your director's report or your annual report. If it doesn't annoy the person and they've got the time, ask them if you can get a picture of them to go with the quote. If you're not working the front desk, ask staff to email you these comments and keep a collection of them. And get your board to talk about the library as well. Get them to mention things that the library are doing in their everyday outside life. Include 1 or 2 of the comments from your patrons every month in your report to the board under the heading, Tell Your Friends and Family. This gives your board members some sound bites and makes it easy for them to add talking to the library about your everyday conversation. You can also ask the people who had a great library experience if they would mind posting their comment on their Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, I believe is the new thing. Everybody tells me I need to learn now. Or ask them if they mind if you can put it on your social media platforms. And if you do put it on your social media platform, make sure you tag your municipality or your council's most ardent social media user. So for us in Stony Plain, it's our mayor. And I always include his favorite hashtag, which is always better in Stony. That way I know he's going to be seeing those because he keeps an eye out for that hashtag. And tag your regional systems as well, because it gives them material for their conversations about why libraries are important to communities. Advocacy should be done something that we all do province-wide, so we might as well make it easy for the people who are out there batting for us as well. And you have to take, your library has to take responsibility for getting on the radar of both your community and your council, because no one else is going to do it for you. Unless it's a bad experience, because all the studies show that people are way more likely to share their bad service experiences than their good ones. So you have to make sure that you've got your positive stories out there already to make sure that you can offset if you do get any of those bad ones. Hopefully you won't get any bad ones, but just in case, then you're ready. And don't just rely on word of mouth to get information and to connect with your council. Invite your council and your municipal administration to the events at your library. If it's family games night, invite the ones with children and grandchildren. If it's a speaker on local history, invite new members who might not know the stories about your community yet. If you have a counselor who is a longtime resident, ask them to do a local history talk. Even if it's maybe they might know more about council history than you think, and maybe that's something that people in the community might be interested in hearing. Whatever it takes to get them into your space so that they can both see and hear for themselves how the work you're doing impacts your community. Elected officials love to be seen doing community things, especially if it puts them in contact with the voters. So getting them into your space means that they're talking to community members who are the library lovers in the community, and they're getting to hear those stories. And depending on the size of your municipality, you'll have different avenues to getting in touch with your counselors. If you're really small, you might just be able to phone or email them directly, but more often they have an executive assistant who handles their calendars. So take the time to find out what the protocol is for your community and follow it. You're much more likely to get a response and to get them to attend your events. So there's not really a polite way to put this, but this has to be said. All of this work of getting your library on your council's radar is based on the assumption that you are actually engaging with your community to meet their needs and fill their gaps and providing great programming and extra service. And if you watched or attended TAL's previous advocacy webinar back in May, it was Advocacy, It's a Way of Thinking, and it was Punch Jackson and Margaret Law. They state that you're not entitled to the money. If you haven't seen this webinar yet, you can access it on the TAL toolshed. It's there. So we all believe very deeply in how excellent our libraries are and that they are essential to a vibrant, thriving community. But we also tend to talk to each other a lot. So we live in our echo chamber where we hear that sentiment echoed back and forth, and we believe that. But once you get out of the echo chamber, not everybody might share that opinion. And it is actually only true if we are active, engaged participants in our communities. If our library is doing that, then you can go in front of council excited to talk about what you're doing and how it makes your shared community better. And if you're struggling to find things that you're excited to share with your council, take a step back and re-examine what you do from an outsider's perspective. It may be that you've gotten so used to the great things that you do, you've stopped being excited about them. And remember to think in terms of scale. It's really easy for Edmonton and Calgary to do amazing things with their budgets and their human resources. But what you're doing might be more amazing when you take into account the amount of resources you have and the amount of time and hours your library is open. So don't compare yourself with different libraries or libraries of a different size and with different resources and with different community situations. What's important is that the things your library is doing are benefiting your community and that you're telling your council and your community about them. So going in front of your councillors is much easier if your library has done the groundwork and built relationships with them before you get into council chambers. And what people struggle with is that building a relationship takes time. And it's the one thing we all have so little of. It's really difficult to justify taking an hour or even 30 minutes to sit down and have coffee or tea or kombucha, depending on the urbanity of your municipality, when you have so many other things clamoring to get done. Relationship building is very much like libraries. We have a great deal of impact, but it's really difficult to measure them. And we struggle with relationship building because it's not something that ends. All relationships, romantic, platonic, business, community, they all have one thing in common. If you neglect them, they will end, and they generally don't end well if you've neglected them. It's tempting to not start doing any relationship building at all because of the commitment required to maintain them. The best thing to do is keep in mind how powerful relationships are and how much benefit your library derives from them. And there we go again with some of our, oh, there we go, we're back. So just to make your life a little more complicated, it's not just your municipal council that you have to develop relationships with. The public library advocacy article I'm quoting from here is Ken Haycock is, and we all know Ken Haycock, states that administrative staff, budget committee members, and elected officials remain the most prominent players in the process, and therefore they are the most influential in funding and budget decisions. So developing relationships with key people in your municipality's administration is also very important. Just like your board relies on you to bring knowledge and expertise about libraries to their decision making, elected officials use the knowledge and the expertise of the administration to help them with their decision making. If none of the people involved in the budget decision making process know anything about the library, again, it's more probable that your funding requests will be reduced during times of scarcity or that you'll be overlooked because there's nobody at the table who's speaking up for you. Now, on the other hand, if your library has developed a relationship with the town CAO or your community services department, as well as with some of the councillors, then there are people at the table who can speak up for the library when you're not there, unless you're lucky enough to be part of your municipality's budget deliberations, in which case you should be over here telling all of us how you managed to do that, because I would love to know. But having advocates at the budget table is definitely worth the time spent having coffee with the key people in your community. Now, don't panic if you need something to talk about. There are specific things to talk about with your municipal council and administration, particularly if you're just beginning the relationship building aspect of it. If you attended Rebecca Jones's pre-conference session at the Alberta Library Conference in 2018, you'll remember that she gave us 3 questions to ask when engaging with people in the community about the library. Rebecca Jones is a managing partner with Dysart and Jones Associates. She used to be in public libraries in Ontario, and now she does consulting in the library world on this exact topic. So these types of conversations and these questions are actually a great first step in relationship building, because it can be a very quick conversation that covers a lot of ground in about 15 minutes. And this is important as well, because until you've established that relationship with your municipality or your administrators, you have to keep in mind that they're just as busy as you are, and being respectful of their time helps them to think positively about the library. So Rebecca suggests starting your conversation by pointing out that, this is her quote, "I would like very much to understand what you are focusing on this year to ensure that the library's focus is aligned. So this conversation won't take more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes tops. When would be a good time to meet with you?" So don't stress or panic, because this whole presentation will be posted on the tool shed, including except my terrible bad attempts at humor. So don't panic about writing the questions down. You'll have access to the entire PowerPoint and all of my notes. So your first question is, what is your focus for this year? In other words, what do you really want to see the municipality to accomplish this year? You want to find out what's important to them. And then your second question is finding out what's keeping them from achieving those things. What are the biggest hurdles that keep you from seeing that happen? And then your third question is, what's helping you meet these goals? Are there other organizations out there that help you meet these goals? And so here's a pro tip. These are great questions to ask even if you already have an existing relationship, unless you are already doing this work and you've already got those questions answered and you have a really deep understanding of what's important to your municipal council and your administration. And pro tip 2, just for fun, these are not specific to administration and council. You can ask these questions of anyone that you are connecting with. For example, if you're looking to build a community partnership with a different organization, or if the great strategic planning questions to ask the people in the public. And if you really want to, if you're out on date night and you have nothing else to talk about, you can ask your partner or your spouse or your friend these questions as well. Rebecca actually recommends closing the conversation by thanking the people you're talking to and suggesting that you'll circle back to them with some moves or initiatives that might be able to support them in reaching those goals. And again, if you're just starting the relationship building process, this also gives you an opportunity for another meeting later on, which supports that relationship development. So council and administration is more likely to want to engage with you when the conversation is about them to begin with, not about your library. This gives you a really solid foundation for the beginning of your relationship with council. And this might seem like a backwards way to get council to care about what you're saying about the library. But somewhat tongue-in-cheek, I'd like to quote Scarlett O'Hara here. The way to get a man interested and to hold his interest was to talk about him and then gradually lead the conversation around to yourself. Now, I'm not suggesting that you engage with your council and administration with that same selfish self-interest as Scarlett O'Hara, but she does have a point. People are deeply interested in what affects them. And if you are coming from a place of empathy when you set out to engage with council and administration, they are more likely to reciprocate and be genuinely interested in what's important to the library and what's important to you. So when you are actually in council chambers doing your presentation, you're not just another face asking for money. You're someone who has shown interest in the issues that council and administration have to deal with, And better yet, you've positioned yourself as an ally when they deal with those issues. So now that you've started spreading the word about the awesomeness of your library, and you found out what's important to council and administration, the actual presentation is the opportunity to bring these elements together. We actually present to council twice a year, once when we present our annual report and once when we make our funding request. And this means that there's one more time when we're connecting with council that does not involve asking for money. And it's a way to officially celebrate and broadcast both the great things that the library does and also some of the challenges we face without a monetary ask attached to it. Council can be invited to celebrate with you, with the library as allies in creating great community, because we don't do it without them. Without the funding we get from council, we can't do the things we do. So we usually do our annual report presentation late May, early June, and then we do our funding request in September, because that's when our council likes it. You'd have to find out when you already know when your council likes to get their funding requests in. So plan to do your annual report presentation a little later in the year so that it's fresh in the minds of council when you go in front of them for the funding request. You want to tie that in. So what do you talk about when you are actually in front of council? We're constantly being told, tell your story, tell your story, tell your story. And it often seems when we're presenting, the only thing council cares about are the numbers. How many people from the county used the library last year? That's the one I hear all the time, because Stony Plain also serves Parkland County. And if you are located in a county, you probably hear that question a lot as well. How many memberships do you have? How many people actually came into the library? It's always the how many. And to be fair, numbers are important to us as well. I mean, if there is a significant drop in memberships or circulation or people coming into the library from one year to the next, we're probably going to need to do some serious investigation into finding out why that's going on. And it is the nature of our society that people providing funding would like to know whether that funding is accomplishing anything. And it's also the nature of our society that numbers tend to dictate whether something is successful. What we have to do is craft all our communication so that the numbers and the narratives complement each other rather than compete with each other. The two are not mutually exclusive, and some people will respond better to the numbers and some people will respond better to the narratives. And I freely admit that this is an area where I struggle because I'm narrative oriented. You can throw numbers at me and the only effect will be for my eyes to glaze over. But if you tell me a story that demonstrates the impact those numbers have, I'm probably going to respond to you exactly the way you wanted me to. And this is important to remember because we tend to default to a practice of neither numbers or narrative depending on how we respond and what works best for us, and we will unthinkingly create our communication pieces that way. So ideally, there's someone else in your library, maybe you've got an accountant on your board, who responds to the opposite of what you respond to, and they can help you develop a well-rounded presentation that brings all pieces together. So I've been trying to keep the presentation generic so far in order to provide basic principles. But to demonstrate how to blend numbers and narratives, I have to rely on providing you with specific examples from Stony Plain. And this is not because I think it's better than anybody else's, but because I, A, have access to all of that material, and B, I'm familiar with all of the thinking behind the material, and C, I have copyright, so I don't have to worry about stealing anybody's stuff. So your communication pieces should reflect your community. But if these help to give you an idea, then that's great as well. To begin with, our actual print annual report contains a blend of narratives and numbers. We have all the charts and the comparative charts because our counselors like to see, well, how does that compare to last year? So we usually provide them with a 5-year comparison of your standard things, the number of programs that we ran, the number of people attending programs from one year to the next, number of people using the computers, the number of circulation, number of memberships, all of the stats that we gather diligently every month and store in an Excel spreadsheet and bring out for all the special communications. But we also include one or two specific stories that relate directly to issues that are important to council. So for example, in Stony Plain, there was a mayor's task force because one of the concerns our council has is that as a bedroom community to Edmonton, more than a lot of people who are living in the newer developments sleep in Stony Plain, but they're working and playing in Edmonton. And this means their money is not being spent locally, and neither is their time or their commitment. So the mayor's task force was focused on volunteerism, but at its heart, it was about civic engagement and getting residents to connect more deeply with our community. So there were two programs that we partnered with other organizations that supported those initiatives, or that demonstrated how what the library does supported those initiatives. One was the My Path program, and one was the Parkland Poet Society. And the Poet Society in particular was really pleasing for council because some of their activities, which were supported by the library, we were partners with them, reversed the trend and brought people from Edmonton to Stony Plain. So back in April, when it's Poetry Month, we hosted a kickoff for the annual Polistroids out in Stony Plain, and a lot of people, a lot of the poets from Edmonton made the trek out to Stony Plain for that event. And there aren't the only activities that we undertook in 2018, but they emphasize the key issues that are important to our council. So in the printed annual report, they were highlighted with a brief outline of one or two paragraphs, like not too much text, because we try to keep our annual report as minimal text as possible, more infographics, because our briefing packages for our council are enormous. So our process is that we submit the print version of the annual report to council prior to the in-person presentation. And because that briefing package is so gigantic, I try to keep the text to a minimum and keep it eye-catching so that they're going to pay attention to it. And having a good relationship with your administration, again, enables us to ask to be put on the agenda and also to know when our print material has to be submitted, because it needs to be given to them at least 10 days ahead of time. So having the material in the briefing package means that the in-person presentation does not have to present the same information. Instead, we can focus on the narrative elements that demonstrate how our library impacts the community beyond the numbers. So all the numbers are in print, but when I'm sitting in front of council doing the presentation, that's where we get to tell the stories. So this image was the front page of our annual report. So council would also have seen it in their briefing package. It gives them a chance to read it. And it came from the advocacy material that was distributed to us from Yellowhead Regional Library, and it provided a perfect structure for our presentation. So this was the first slide, and the rest of the slides incorporated pictures from our library related to each one of those pieces on the wheel. So some connections were made previously in the annual report to tie everything together, but the in-person presentation was used to bring out the narrative stories rather than the numbers, which again, council had already seen. So for example, that engaged citizens section of the wheel, again, focusing on that because that's an issue that's near and dear to council's heart, allowed us to talk more in depth about the My Path program that was featured in the annual report, as well as provide other examples of what our library does that fosters engaged citizens and safer communities. So this approach has two advantages. We can get more detailed in a verbal presentation to council than is advisable for a print document. Again, their council briefing packages are gigantic. If we included all of this information in our annual report, they would skim the information, but it's not very likely that they're going to read all of the details that are important. So our annual report is usually 8 to 12 pages long, and again, very light on text. And the other advantage is that we can make explicit connections in our verbal presentation to those issues that were identified as being important to council and administration. You have the opportunity to refer back to your coffee conversations that you had when you were doing that relationship building, So if you remember, for example, you could say, like, if you remember when we were talking back in February, Mayor Choi, you mentioned how difficult it is to get young kids doing things around the community. It's really exciting for us to have been able to show you how the library is working on getting them engaged in different ways. And then go into detail about what the Teen Advisory Group is doing, what the Connect the Dots program is doing, what the MyPath program is doing. And you can't put that type of statement in your annual report because there's no context for it. Those are documents that are kept for posterity, but the verbal in-person council presentation allows you to be able to do that. And the rest of our slides follow this pattern as well. We use the photographs from events throughout the year to highlight the stories we told council that connected them with the numbers. Take lots and lots and lots of pictures. It's really difficult for us to find great pictures because of the fluorescent lighting in our library. All our pictures are super yellow. So it's the bane of my existence trying to find good pictures. So I keep reminding all of our staff to take pictures whenever they can. They keep a camera up at the front desk. And we had a member of our community who is a professional photographer create the settings so that it minimizes that yellow thing on the fluorescent lighting. And staff are not allowed to touch the settings. That way, if your camera is always handy, you can always take a picture because sometimes those moments happen and you wish you had your camera, but it wasn't available. Okay, so that's enough about Stony Plain, me, Stony Plain Library. The point of these specific examples was just to give concrete examples of how your council presentation is a combination and culmination of the promotional and relationship building work your library has been doing throughout the year, as well as a combination of narrative and numbers. When we acknowledge the importance of the numbers and connect the narrative to the issues that are important to council, we improve the likelihood that they're going to listen to what we have to say and also care about what we have to say. And another key element of getting council to hear you is to use language that resonates with them. So some people in library land that I know are adept at incorporating what I call the business speak into their conversations and presentations, but this is not my strength. I recognize the importance of that terminology though, so because many of our counselors come from a business background. So I've learned to use terms like accountability, fiscally responsible, and God help me, return on investment. Like, I clearly can't speak for everyone, but I do believe that most of us understand that we are taxpayer-funded organizations and we have a duty of care with the funds that we receive. We have to balance that out with trying to reduce or remove the barriers to service that many people in our community face. But if we say to our councils that we are aware of and we demonstrate that awareness of the economic dilemmas they face, and that we are doing our best to be financially responsible with the funds that we are given, again, they are far more likely to engage with us. Make sure you actually know what the words mean. This can actually be part of the relationship building work that you're doing when you're having coffee with the counselors and the administration. Take the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, out for lunch as well. Pay attention to the language they use when they're describing their issues and the hurdles they're facing. And ask them for clarification if you don't understand the term. So, for example, in the couple of weeks leading up to the budget, I have learned more about the MSI, or the Municipal Sustainability Initiative, than I ever cared to know. Spoiler alert, reducing the MSI funding does not make counselors and administrators happy, just so that was there. I guess I'm wrapping up. I realized that you were expecting 50 minutes, and I guess we're at 40, but I guess it leaves us more questions. And I know that you were thinking it was just going to be on council presentation, but separating out the importance of getting your library on your community's radar and building relationships with counselors and administration from the council presentation is virtually impossible if you want the presentation to be effective. And the key takeaway for your libraries in terms of advocacy should be that all of your advocacy pieces are, or at least they should be, connected to each other. Relationship building, promoting your library, presenting to counselors, those are the three core pieces that fit together, and they need to be discussed as a whole, not as siloed pieces. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
All right, we already have a question.
All right.
Is there a concern with FOIP when taking pictures and putting them into your annual report?
We always make sure that, first of all, if it's a verbal, if we're asking the person in the moment, that we have their permission to use, and we say all the things in our annual report, on our Facebook, on our social media, in our printed materials, and we get a verbal response for those. For all of our programs, whenever we take those pictures, we tell people ahead of time, we're going to be taking pictures and using it in these types of situations. If you don't want to have your picture, please let us know. If we're having a really large event, we will ask the people who don't want to have their picture taken or be recorded to put like a little smiley yellow sticker on their shirt. That way we can take pictures of whatever we want, and then if there are pictures with anybody with that smiley face, we can just, well, we won't use that picture, or we blur their face, or usually we just don't take that picture at all or use that picture at all.
Right now, it's the only question we have.
Not sure if that means everybody was sleeping or I was very clear and concise.
I suspect it was because everyone's just thinking really hard about that. Oh, looks like Sharon Siga just put her hand up. I'm just gonna turn. Oh, she's on the phone, so I'm just gonna turn her phone on here.
Sure. Hi, Sharon.
Sorry, just 1 second. Okay, Sharon, you're on now.
I just wanted to say how great your presentation was. I really like how you pointed out that all three of those things are so crucial.
And you didn't have the speakers on.
Sorry, could you, Sharon, could you ask that again?
Just wanted to say how great that was, Allison, and I really appreciated the focus on those three, kind of like three legs on a stool. You have to have all of those three core pieces together. Thanks.
Sharon, you're going to have to say all of that again.
I'll chat. How's that?
Sure.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Technical difficulties.
At least the technical difficulties are happening at the end, not at the beginning.
So I'm just going to mute Sharon again.
That's why I finished early. I scheduled 5 to 10 minutes for technical difficulties.
We've got a couple of follow-up questions here. Will you be sharing the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, the PowerPoint presentation with all of my notes will be on Toolshed.
And then a comment. Great presentation. Good to know that we are on the right track.
Oh, good.
And so I have another question here. With these annual municipal goal chats, when do you do these? Like the beginning of the year in January or sometime later in the year? And is this a chat you have every year?
It's not so much a scheduled chat as it is, well, first, if you haven't developed a relationship with your municipality yet, then contact your municipality and make an appointment or ask if you can connect with them right away. And I would do it right away, immediately. And then have that conversation with them. For myself, because we've already done this relationship building work, a lot of times for me it's just a very casual, like, you know, when we see counselors out and about at different events, or they've popped into the library for whatever reason, it'll be a quick 2-3 minute conversation with, so how are things over there, what's making you guys crazy over in council chambers these days, or what's the big topic, and what's really bothering you, or and also asking what's going really well, because they like to celebrate their successes as well. And if you're only just ever constantly asking them about what's going wrong, then they kind of associate that as a negative thing. But it's fun to celebrate successes also.
Okay, I have a couple more questions. How did you know that Edmonton was coming to your events?
Oh, we asked people where they came from, and also the Parkland Poets people who, so the Parkland Poets Festival, or the whole Poets Society, started because a woman came into the library and said, I'm sick of driving into Edmonton for poetry. Can we do something? And we said, yes, because that's what libraries do. So they got themselves going. We allow them to use our program room free twice a month on the second and fourth Thursdays of every month. And then when they do events, the library supports those as well, either by providing space or logistics and promotions and all of those types of things. So we ask them to keep track of who's coming from where. So they just basically do a show of hands at their event. So where's everybody from? Is everybody local? Spruce Grove, Stony Plain, Parkland County, anybody from Edmonton, and they just raise their hands.
Okay, so this next question I think I can answer. This is the question. This is me talking. This is my first time attending these webinars. How often do they happen? They happen, I guess, on a semi-regular basis. And we usually announce them on the DROML listserv as well as on the TAL website and on Twitter. We have another one coming up. Just going to pull up the information for this. On November 6th at 10 a.m. The login information, sorry, the registration information is available on the TAL website. And this is How to Talk to Your MLA by Heather Klimchuk, the former MLA and cabinet minister, where she'll be discussing how to essentially engage with your local MLA, given the opportunity. So we're very excited about that. That'll be at 10 a.m. on November 6th, and I hope everyone who's interested is able to register. And then any other future webinars we will be doing, we'll be sure to announce again via DROML and the TAL website as well as Twitter. And I think that is it for the questions. Maybe we'll just wait for one more minute because we have a bit of time. Did you have any additional thoughts about engaging with your council?
Just wanted to say thank you to everybody who tuned in. I really do hope that you got some useful, concrete ideas for how to connect with your municipal council. It's going to become really important in the next little while, I think, with the latest budget that came down. I think a lot of them are stressed, so I think helping them know that the library's on their side will really help them out as well.
Okay, great. Actually, I do have a question for you. If any of these people want to contact you directly, what would be the best way to?
Oh, best way to contact me is by email. So first name ALLISON, last initial S, Allison S, at myspppl.ca. And you can find me on our library's website. Just Google Stony Plain Public Library. I should actually, and what I will also do is edit the slideshow presentation so that my contact information is part of the slideshow as well. So then you can just go to the tool shed, grab the slideshow, and then my contact information will be on the presentation.
I guess we have one last comment here, and I think that's good enough to end on. It says, thank you. This is very helpful and has given me a few ideas to take back to our board.
Awesome. I'm very glad to hear that. Thank you.
Okay, with that, thank you very much, everybody.
Have a great rest of your afternoon.